He was being starved to death. He was being beaten. Wasn't allowed outside. Had no toys. No friends. He was being belittled and bullied.
Emotions were so high, some family members wept and had to leave the courtroom as the defendant, 37-year-old Asaro Aguirre, who has pled not guilty to capital murder charges, sat in court without expression.
Welcome or welcome back, and thanks for being here. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. The story I have for you today is one that you might have heard about because it was one of the worst cases of child abuse that officials in California had ever seen. It was also one of the biggest failings of Child Protective Services. This is the story of Gabriel Fernandez. Gabriel Daniel Fernandez was born on February 20th, 2005, to Arnold Contreras and Pearl Fernandez in Palmdale, California. He was said to be a kind, caring, generous, and smart little boy who loved the Ninja Turtles and playing cops and robbers. Gabriel also had 3 older siblings named Virginia, Ezekiel, and Arnold. While his mother Pearl was pregnant with him, she would decide that she did not want the little boy. And his father, Arnold, was in jail and would be in and out of jail for most of his life. However, Gabriel's uncle, Michael Limos Carranza, and his partner, David Martinez, wanted the little boy, and they convinced Pearl to carry her pregnancy to full term. Then they would take the child. So when Gabriel was just 3 days old, yes, just 3, Pearl called up the uncles and told them to come get their kid because he was crying and getting on her nerves. Following this, Gabriel lived with David and Michael for years, and they adored the little boy, and he adored them as well. Gabriel's other family members even saw how happy the little boy was and said that he was well adjusted and well taken care of while with them. Then, when the little boy was 4, his uncles would give him up to his maternal grandparents. This came after Gabriel's grandfather, Robert Fernandez, expressed his concerns about a gay couple raising the boy. According to Gabriel's uncle, though, this didn't make sense because nobody in the family but them had even wanted Gabriel prior to his birth. Gabriel's grandparents' accounts on this differs, however, and Robert and Sandra Fernandez would say that in March of 2005, when Gabriel was just a few weeks old, Pearl had turned over custody of the baby to them, stating that she did not want the child and had no love for him. Since then, they had primarily raised the young boy. Either way, when Gabriel was 4 years old, he moved in with his grandparents, and he would stay there until September of 2012. This was when he was returned to his mother Pearl's custody. At this point, Pearl had a new live-in boyfriend too, named Asaro Aguirre, who was also known as Tony. Gabriel's older brother Ezekiel and older sister Virginia were also now living in the home, as they had been returned to their mother's custody about a year prior. Now, Pearl's family knew that the mother was not able to properly care for her children, so giving Gabriel to her was not willingly. What had happened was one day in the summer of 2012, Pearl and Asaro had contacted Gabriel's grandparents, asking if they could bring the boy to a barbecue that was going on at Asaro's family's home. The grandparents agreed and let him go. But when Pearl never returned Gabriel later that day, and they could not get a hold of her, Gabriel's grandparents decided to file a kidnapping report. However, in the end, it was decided that Gabriel could continue living with his mother Pearl, as his grandparents actually never had legal custody of him. Pearl had the right to take her son back at any point in time. Now, Pearl had also told social workers that she was concerned about how her relatives were treating her son. But the real reason why the mother wanted Gabriel was simply so that she could get the welfare benefits that he came with each month. Gabriel's grandparents had even warned authorities about giving him back to his mother. They knew that not only did Pearl have no bond with her son, but she also had a terrible temper. So shortly after Gabriel was returned to Pearl's custody, someone would call Child Services saying that he had been molested by one of his uncles whom had previously had custody of him. However, no one has confirmed this allegation, and his uncles vehemently deny it. Gabriel's mother, Pearl, had already been the subject of a social service investigation herself. Prior to Gabriel's birth back in 2003, there were allegations of severe neglect to her children. She and one of her older sons had been involved in a car accident, and the child had suffered head injuries because he hadn't been wearing a seatbelt. A year after that, in 2004, a relative filed a complaint with Child Protective Services, saying that Pearl was beating that same son. But social workers would find that the claim was unfounded, and Pearl kept custody of the child. Then, 2 years after Gabriel was born in 2007, another complaint was filed against the mother, this time claiming that she neglected to feed her daughter and had threatened to break her jaw when she cried. That same year, Pearl had been convicted of using a weapon in a reckless manner, and she had been sentenced to 2 weeks in a Texas jail. Then in 2012, once Gabriel and her other children were returned to her, the calls just continued. Only weeks after Gabriel began living in the home with his mother, Azaro, and his siblings, the boy's teacher would call Child Services reporting that Gabriel had bruises on his face and hands. The little boy had also asked his teacher if it was normal for mothers to hit their children. The teacher said, well, some parents do that. Then she further pressed him. And Gabriel would ask her if it was normal to be hit with the buckle part of a belt. And he wanted to know if it was normal for him to bleed. The teacher went on to report these concerns to Child Protective Services, who then went out to the home to meet with Gabriel and his mother. They interviewed the young boy, but they did so in the presence of Pearl. So of course, the little boy told the social worker that he had lied about what he had said to his teacher, that his mom had not done those things. However, upon the social worker doing a physical examination of Gabriel's body, he discovered a bruise on his buttocks. It was only then that Pearl confessed to hitting her son with a belt buckle. Yet even with this observation, the social worker determined that no further action needed to be taken. The only thing the worker did ask was that Pearl and her live-in boyfriend, Asaro, take drug tests. This was due to Gabriel having mimicked snorting a line of cocaine in class when his teacher talked to the students about the dangers of doing drugs. Over the next few months, the same teacher would report to social services that Gabriel had come to school with scratches, a busted lip, patches of missing hair, and scabs on his head. The busted lip, Gabriel would say, was from his mother punching him in the face. The claims would be looked into again by social workers, and again, they would interview Gabriel right in front of his mother, Pearl. Therefore, he retracted what he had said earlier about how his injuries had occurred. As time went on, Gabriel would often complain in school about how his arms and legs ached. He also became more withdrawn, playing by himself more often. Soon, Gabriel started to get angry very easily in class, and his teacher had to move his seat from time to time as he began kicking students. And on multiple occasions, the teacher would find Gabriel crying because he did not want to go back home after the school day was over. Then, one day in January of 2013, Gabriel came into class looking particularly awful. His eyes were puffy and swollen, and he had little purple welts all over his face. Gabriel claimed that he'd just fallen down. When his teacher told him that she didn't believe that story, Gabriel would admit that his mother had shot him in the face with a BB gun. When he was questioned as to why he had lied to the teacher in the first place, Gabriel said that it was because when he did tell his teacher something, the lady would then come out to his home, and after that, his mother would just beat him more. On March 26th, yet another report was filed with Child Services in regards to Gabriel. This time, it was by a therapist who said that the young boy had told her that he'd been forced to perform oral sex on a relative. And yet again, even though the allegations were very serious, Gabriel was only interviewed in front of his mother, so he again changed his story. There was even one time that police had gone out to the home to check on some injuries to Gabriel's body. While they were there, Pearl informed them that her son had just gotten into a fight with some other children. So the mother's word was once again what authorities believed, completely disregarding the 8-year-old's account. And the officers took Gabriel, placed him in the back of the police cruiser, then told him that if he continued to lie about how he had obtained his injuries, he would be the one going to jail. Absolutely sickening that they would sit there and believe the mother over this young boy who had all these injuries on his body, and then tell him that. Another time, when a counselor was just about to leave following an in-home visit with the family, Pearl suddenly told her that she had something that she wanted her to see. Then, the mother handed the counselor a few notes that Gabriel had written. In these notes, he talked about wanting to commit suicide. One note read, "I love you so much that I will kill myself." Another said, "I love you till I die." She believed that they were just a cry for attention because her son wanted to go back to living with her mother, his grandmother. But in reality, they were likely a way of Pearl trying to prove that Gabriel was just hurting himself. Then, on April 26, 2013, a security guard named Arturo Martinez, who was working at the Los Angeles Department of Social Services, noticed Pearl and her children enter the building. When they did, Arturo also saw that Gabriel had multiple injuries on his body. He saw what looked like old and new cigarette burns on his head and purple-greenish bruises near his eyes. Arturo immediately knew that he was witnessing the results of child abuse. As soon as the family left the room, Arturo got up to speak with his coworker, Marisola Corona. She worked in the domestic violence department, so he asked her to report what he'd seen. Marisela called her supervisor, but she was told that since it was late in the day and they didn't want to pay any overtime, that she should do nothing. So instead, Marisela told Arturo that she would give him the family's name and address so he could do something to help the little boy. She didn't want to get involved because she was afraid of losing her job. So Arturo took the information and called up his supervisor to inform him of the situation. However, the supervisor told Arturo that it wasn't his job and he shouldn't get involved. Also, he could get written up if he did. Arturo could not believe the response he was getting when he saw a child that was clearly in need of help. He hung up with the supervisor, disgusted by what he'd said, and decided instead to call 911. But they informed him that since it wasn't an emergency, he needed to call the sheriff's department. And he did. When Arturo spoke with someone at the sheriff's department, they assured him that they would send someone out to the home to check on things. Then that was that. Just weeks later, in early May of 2013, Gabriel's school, who was growing increasingly concerned about him due to the BB gunshot wounds, asked a sheriff's deputy to investigate the situation at the home. But the officer would end up claiming that he'd been given the wrong address. He was, however, able to talk to Pearl on the phone, who informed the officer that Gabriel had actually moved to Texas with his grandmother. But just weeks after that, on May 22, 2013, Pearl's live-in boyfriend, Asaro, was calling 911, reporting that Gabriel was unresponsive. According to him, the boy had just been playing in his room with his brother, when he'd fallen into a piece of furniture which knocked him unconscious. During the call, Asaro would be instructed on how to perform CPR until the first responders arrived, and he said that he was, yet it did not sound at all like he was doing that. When paramedics arrived, they found 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez lying on the ground face up on a towel. He was naked and had injuries all over his body. The little boy was rushed to the hospital, and it was discovered that he had many, many injuries, including a fractured skull, broken ribs, burn marks on his throat, bruises and cuts all over his face, black eyes, ligature marks on his ankles, a bullet in his lung and groin, cigarette burn marks, and he had skin and teeth missing. On top of all of that, doctors discovered human bite marks on Gabriel, and his penis had a deep gash near the base. Doctors would declare Gabriel as brain dead not long after he'd been brought to the hospital, and he passed away 2 days later, on May 24, 2013. An autopsy later determined that the 8-year-old boy had died from a combination of blunt force trauma, malnutrition, and neglect. The coroner would also discover that Gabriel's thymus gland was shriveled and much, much smaller than what was expected in a child of his age. This indicated that he had been under severe psychological stress for a long period of time. Additionally, cat litter was found to be the only substance that was inside Gabriel's stomach. Now, neither Pearl or Asaro had been detained by police at the time that Gabriel was taken away in the ambulance. Yet neither one of them went in it with him to the hospital. They also showed no emotion as he was being taken away. When Pearl was questioned by detectives, she said that her son had just fallen inside the shower. She also seemed to be quite disinterested in what was going on with Gabriel, though she did inquire about her other children's well-being. She was additionally concerned about the family's 7 cats being left alone in the apartment in a cage. When Pearl's boyfriend Asaro was questioned about Gabriel's many injuries, he would claim that the little boy was often angry and would hurt himself. He also said that there had been a bike accident a few days earlier and tried to blame that. The day after Gabriel had been rushed to the hospital, May 23rd, both Pearl and Asaro were arrested and charged with attempted murder. When Gabriel died the following day, they were then both charged instead with first-degree murder with special circumstance of torture. Upon detective search of the home where Gabriel had lived, they found specks of the 8-year-old's blood throughout. There were specks of it everywhere. Authorities also found a cupboard inside Pearl and Asaro's room, in which Gabriel had been forced to spend hours every single day. He would have his hands and ankles bound. Then he was gagged with a rag and put inside this cupboard, which would be handcuffed shut. Gabriel had been locked in this prison every night and often for hours on end during the day too. On occasion, he would even be hidden in this cupboard when social workers came out to check on things in the home. Investigators then found that Gabriel's clothing had all been bagged up and put underneath the bathroom sink. The only 2 things left for him to wear were dresses. The little boy would sometimes take other clothing to school with him to change into in the bathrooms, but once his mother Pearl found out about this, he would get beaten. Now, even though Gabriel was forced to wear girls' clothes, the boy was also punished for exhibiting any feminine-like qualities and called gay. When Gabriel's siblings were interviewed by detectives, they would tell about the horror that had been going on inside the home. They spoke about how Gabriel had been forced to eat cat feces, cat litter, and his own vomit. He'd been burned with cigarettes, sprayed in the face with pepper spray, hit with a metal coat hanger and belt buckle, shot in the chest, face, legs, and groin with a BB gun, hit in the face with a bat, and also pinned up against the wall by Asaro for so long that he passed out. One time, Asaro had even struck Gabriel so hard that his head bounced back and left an indentation in the wall. According to the siblings, Pearl and Asaro would both gang up and beat Gabriel at the same time, laughing during these attacks. Gabriel's brother Ezekiel would say that his mother and her boyfriend had threatened him with the same types of beatings if he told anyone about what was going on with his brother or did anything to try to stop them. He was also forced to lie about many of Gabriel's injuries, saying that they had occurred while they were playing. Inside the home, Gabriel had not been allowed to have any toys and was not allowed to play with any friends or siblings. On the day that his brother had died, Ezekiel said that Asaro had hit Gabriel until he was bleeding. Then he dragged him into his room and shut the door. Ezekiel would hear screams and bangs. Then suddenly everything would go quiet. Gabriel's sister would say something similar, and she claimed that prior to the 911 call being made, Asaro had been beating up her brother. He did this until he knocked the wind out of Gabriel and the boy fell over, not getting back up. After that, Asaro and Pearl had picked Gabriel up and thrown him in the shower, trying to revive him. And they kept yelling for him to wake up. But when he didn't wake up, Pearl decided it was time to call the police. She then told Gabriel's sister to grab a rag and start cleaning the blood that was on the floor. This assault on Gabriel had apparently come after he had asked his mother why she let Asaro treat her the way he did. And he asked his mother to leave him. Pearl had then confronted Asaro about this, telling him what Gabriel had said. This enraged Asaro, and he began punching and kicking Gabriel over and over. When Asaro was later interviewed by detectives, he would say that on a scale of 1 to 10, his anger with Gabriel that day was at a 20. He had just seen red and lost all control. He had never hit someone so hard.
So, exactly what happened. Cold hard fact now. You see him? You hit him over the head. Okay? And what did you hit him over the head with? Yes. Your fist. How many times? Maybe 10 times. Maybe 10 times with your fist to the head. So yeah, because 10 times over the You pick it back up and you hit him again. Okay? How many times did you do that? When you had to knock him down and pick him up? 4 or 5 times. 4 or 5 times.
Aguirre admits at one point losing count. In their cross-examination, the defense played the video recording of Aguirre's interview with detectives. Aguirre describes trying to revive the 8-year-old when he stopped breathing.
When I took him out, I figured that, bubbles or air bubbles in his lungs. So I told her, give me the phone so I can find out more. And she did. So I have the speaker, tell me to do the conversion, the CPR.
Sadly, just days before Pearl and her boyfriend had tortured little Gabriel to death, he had made his mother a card for Mother's Day that showed a picture of a house that Gabriel colored and said, "Open the door to see who loves you," and it led to a school picture of him. Inside the card he'd written, "My mom is special because she is a loving mom, and I love her because she is beautiful." He also smiled in the photos that his teacher took of him, with the letters MOM for his Mother's Day card. Gabriel had made all this loving stuff for his mother, the one who never wanted him and never loved him. Not that it's any excuse for what she had done to her son, but Pearl also had a difficult childhood herself. Her father was frequently incarcerated, and her mother was said to be abusive and neglectful. At only 9 years old, Pearl had begun using methamphetamine and drinking alcohol. Then, at only 11, she'd ran away from home, and she dropped out of school in 8th grade. Pearl would claim that when she was a teenager, her uncle had tried to rape her. There had also, at one point, been a group of men who had taken her hostage for a number of days, and during these days, they had taken turns raping her. Pearl had been diagnosed with a depressive disorder, a developmental disability, a personality disorder, and PTSD. She only had the verbal comprehension skills of those of a typical 2nd grader. Now, Pearl would claim that many of her romantic partners were controlling and abusive towards her, though according to her relatives, it was actually quite the opposite. And Pearl was the one who was very controlling, manipulative, had a bad temper, and had been known to assault her partners. She had even hit, punched, and scratched Asaro in front of her family in the past. And he wasn't the only boyfriend whom she'd been this way towards. According to Pearl's family, they had a feeling that she would do something bad one day to hurt somebody and end up in jail. But they never thought that it would be one of her children. On February 15, 2018, Pearl Fernandez would plead guilty to her charge of first-degree murder as part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. She was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, Pearl would say, "I want to say I'm sorry to my family for what I did. I wish Gabriel was alive, and every day I wish that I would have made better choices. I'm sorry to my children, and I want them to know that I love them." The trial for Asaro Aguirre, who had also been charged with first-degree murder in connection with Gabriel's death, would begin in September of 2017. His defense tried to push the narrative that Pearl was the main aggressor in their relationship, and she had manipulated and bossed Asaro around. Backing up their claims was surprisingly the fact that Asaro had no criminal history up until this point. And 2 of his former girlfriends would testify that they had never had any problems with Asaro. He had always been helpful and respectful. In the past, Asaro had even worked in a retirement home as a caregiver and driver. And his old boss would say that Asaro was a caring person who was always willing to help. But regardless of all this, the jury would end up siding with the prosecution, believing that Asaro had beat Gabriel to death. He was found guilty on his charge of first-degree murder, as well as guilty on the circumstance of torture. Asaro was later sentenced to death.
Arnold Contreras testifies that the death of his son changed his life and the lives of Gabriel's siblings.
The family will never be the same. Everybody was affected by it.
Contreras says he is racked with guilt. He was serving time, unable to watch over his son.
Felt helpless, guilty. I should have been there.
Had he been able, he would have stopped Gabriel's mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend, Isauro Aguirre, from taking Gabriel from the grandparents who adored him.
Pearl never showed any type of love towards Gabriel.
Gabriel had unconditional love for you, and you took advantage of that, knowing he will never turn you in.
And I know I'm not alone in hoping that they experience the same abuse in their lifetime and worse. They are evil people for what they did.
She described Gabriel as a kind and helpful boy. She no longer uses his student number.
I don't assign number 28 to another student because I feel that it's only his number now. And it's a way for me to honor him in my classroom.
4 social workers on Gabriel's case were each charged with 1 count of felony child abuse and 1 count of falsifying public records. Prosecutors said that all 4 failed to take the necessary steps to protect Gabriel, and then they falsified the documents relating to his case as well. But in January of 2020, the court would conclude that there was not enough evidence or probable cause to hold the social workers on these charges, and they were therefore dropped. 9 sheriff's deputies from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department were internally disciplined for not properly investigating the abuse allegations. But from all the failings that Gabriel experienced in his short life, that's all the punishment that came from it.
Breaking his silence, Gabriel's uncle Chris Contreras. He and his wife adopted Gabriel's siblings, the walking wounded.
Something brings it back, and it's just all those emotions are there. It's not any easier.
Ezekiel was 12 and Virginia 10 when they witnessed the torture inflicted by their own mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend, Isauro Aguirre, living in a household gripped by fear. To this day, Contreras says Gabriel's siblings don't let themselves have fun, no matter how much he tries.
Unfortunately, I think this is something that's going to affect them the rest of their lives, one way or another.
For him, it's personal. He takes aim at the Department of Children and Family Services.
What they did is almost as bad as what Pearl and Isauro did.
Following Gabriel's death, a memorial for the boy started outside the apartment complex where he had once lived. A beautifully painted mural in Pacoima, California, was also put up in honor of 8-year-old Gabriel. A poem that was chosen by his family was painted on the mural next to his smiling face. The poem, titled "As I Sit in Heaven," reads, "As I sit in heaven and watch you every day, I try to let you know with signs that I never went away. I hear you when you're laughing and watch you as you sleep. I even place my arms around you to calm you as you weep. I see you wish the days away, begging to have me home. So I try to send you signs so you know you're not alone. Don't feel guilty that you have life that was denied to me. Heaven is truly beautiful, just you wait and see. So live your life, laugh again, enjoy yourself, be free. Then I know with every breath you take, you'll be taking one for me." Gabriel's body would be cremated, and his ashes now remain with family. Well, thank you for listening to Gabriel's story today. It's unbelievable how much Pearl and Isauro got away with for so long. There were many, many visible signs that Gabriel was being hurt in his home, and he even told multiple people that that was the case. But anyone who could have done anything to protect him just ignored him, assuming that he was lying about his injuries and where they'd come from. Instead, just taking his mother's story for what happened. How does that make sense? It enrages me how many people just think that since children are children, they're going to make up lies and stories like this for no reason whatsoever. Because the thing is, a child would not lie time and time again, saying that an adult had hurt them and caused all these injuries on their body when they had just accidentally gotten them. So if you like true crime and you want to hear from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below and turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is at least 3 times every single week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care, guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon, so check it out on patreon.com/awickedworld, or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims are never forgotten, and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a story you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email to awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.